Welcome back to another series of Meet the Masters. My name is Alexander Dragonic, and today I'm with the creator of some of the greatest wines in the Loire Valley, Ivan Massonat from Belargus.
Thanks, Alex.
So the number one thing that always comes to mind when I interview somebody is climate change, which is a very important factor in today's winemaking and today's viticulture. So I wanted to see how is climate change impacting Loire as a region as a whole. I know it has 52 appellations, it's quite big, so it's a lot of different terroirs. But how is it impacting specifically your region, and what are you doing to kind of adapt to it?
So I would say there are really two sides to this equation. On the one hand, because the Loire is in the northern part of France, you could say that our generation is benefiting from global warming, because we can now, and it's very true on the red side, it's true on the white side, but very true on the red side, we can now choose maturity, whereas our ancestors were they got the maturity that nature was giving them in any year, and in many instances it would just be not ripe or not ripe enough. So I think the Loire Valley wines, if you look at the last decade or so, have been much more regular in style, better ripeness, and therefore easier production conditions. So that's the plus side of the equation, I would say. But there's also a minus side, of course, and of course one is that, you know, if it continues to go up and up in temperature, you know, we may be like the other regions and fighting for water, hydric stress, and therefore maturity blockage. But today we are already fighting with a very concrete consequence of global warming is the spring frost. I mentioned it on the 2019 vintage. If you look at, we've harvested 6 vintages since I started the project. We've been hit twice very hard, like -70, -80%. On exceptional terroirs, you know, we have a lot of hillsides and south-facing early terroirs. Those terroirs 20 or 30 years ago were never hit by frost, because there was a proper winter time, and therefore the spring frost was not so damaging. Today, it's not colder in April, it's just that the vegetation is so much more advanced. And that is very true on Chenin. Chenin is a grape variety that buds very early, so it's very exposed to spring frost. So I would say the most tangible consequence of this global warming for us is the frost. So we are fighting against it, but there are only so many ways you can fight against it. So one way is, of course, pruning later, and maybe in 2 steps. That's what we try and do. It's very labor intensive, but I think it's one solution for some terroirs. We used to have the candles that I'm sure you've seen, etc. We've decided to stop that from an environmental standpoint. It was crazy. And we are testing now new technologies around using electricity. So electric wires, but not the old style electric wires. It's infrared wires, so things that consume a lot less energy, and that can protect, and that I have protected. We've been testing it for 2 years, and it seems to be working quite well. So it's a way to protect the vineyards, but you know, it is a challenge for sure.
Of course, I can imagine. But as you mentioned that you're using certain methods of preventing this, right? There's a certain dilemma between tradition and modern advancements. Do you apply a lot of modern techniques in the vineyard and in the winery, and do you get anything from the purists telling you, oh, this is not?
I mean, you're staying on the topic. I think pruning later in 2 steps is really old ways of managing certain terroirs that are exposed to frost. But at the same time, we are really using technology and trying to use it for what it's best. If I take another example about treatments, as you know, the vineyards need to be treated. We are organically certified, but still we need to protect the vineyards. We are also using technology in some of our steepest hillsides. Everything is done manually, the old way, but we now are testing drone technologies, for example, to spray without risking, because sometimes when you are facing, very steep hillsides, it could be dangerous, etc. So we are, I think it's a mix of being very artisan in our approach and repeating gestures that have been made for generations, but also using technology where it can help really.
Okay, cool. And I've read that some of your biggest mentors in the vineyard management would definitely be Thibaut Belair.
Thibaut Belair is a good friend of mine, yeah.
Joe Piton.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also had some inspiration from Salos, as I understand.
Yeah. But many others. Philippe Paquelet also.
Paquelet, yes.
Because, and maybe we should explain that, I became a vigneron by passion. So really, nothing was programming me to be a vigneron. I mean, I did grow in a vineyard, but I didn't drink wine until I was in my 20s. And it became an instant passion for me, and I spent my whole adult life meeting with winemakers. So the ones you mentioned and many others have inspired me over the years. When I was young, Burgundy was not what it is today. It was kind of a little bit unknown, a little bit sort of hidden, and that
peasant
fascinated me. Yeah, exactly. It was a bit peasant wine. At the time, Bordeaux was the best, etc. I am really the Burgundy generation in that I saw it grow into something very, very big and very obvious today. And along this journey, I learned everything and most of what I've tried to apply to my project in the Loire from Burgundy winemakers, because they have this obsession about terroir, those vins de lieu. So one grape variety, be it Pinot or Chardonnay, expressing very different kind of characteristics depending on the plots they are coming from. And that really fascinated me as a taster at the beginning. And when I developed my own project, I applied the same logic, which is the terroir logic. In the Loire Valley, as you know, we have also two very iconic grape varieties, Cabernet Franc for the red and Chenin for the whites. And after pretty long history, I decided to focus on Chenin first to create Belargus. But I'm really applying the same logic of expressing terroirs through the grape variety.
I was actually hanging out with Thibaut a few months ago.
Yeah.
Very nice guy, very fun, wants to hang out, but super knowledgeable, and you can see that he's like focused extremely on what he does.
Absolutely.
It's like you said, like an obsession,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And through him and others, but I really was fascinated by wine because of the 1,000 little decisions you can make to get to the final product.
Yeah.
From the vineyard all the way to the cellar, to everything you're doing, you can make choices that will have an impact. I'm convinced about that. Sure. And that quest for excellence, that quest for beauty also, because making wine is about trying to make a beautiful product, really has been my lifelong passion. It's now my life,
and you have a fascinating approach to detail, like when you said to us the other night that you started the winery in 2018, so that's quite recently, right? But the amount of focus that you have on every single aspect of the terroir, the vineyards, when are you picking the grapes, how are you picking the grapes, what are you doing in the winery? It's like you've been in this for 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, first, this project has been in my mind for 10 years at least, so I really prepared for very, 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 very long. I had a very precise view of what I wanted to do, and my conception of winemaking is really about attention to details. It's the little details, small details, but to the power of 1,000 will give you, I think, an exceptional product in the end.
Oh, for sure.
But it's all about the details. You mentioned picking, we are obsessed with getting the right maturity. Chenin is a very heterogeneous grape variety. So on the same vine, you may have a green grape, a yellow grape, golden grape, maybe a rotten grape at the same time. If you pick it at once, there's no way you can be. If you mix not ripe and overripe, you will not get the right maturity. It will be an average, but it will not be precise. It will be blurry, if you will. If you do, however, what the old people were doing, which is doing by trees selection, so you go 2 to 3 times minimum each year in each plot, sometimes up to 5, 6 times, you can pick that right maturity. By doing so, it makes it a bit longer, a little bit more labor intensive, but you are in control of your maturity. And that's the beginning of the process, because from that point onwards, our approach is very minimalist. Slow press, natural yeast, aging on lees. We try to avoid steering, racking, no sulfur if we can. So basically, from the moment you cut the grape and press it, there's not much you can do to influence. So it's all about little details, about the press you use, the types of press, the length of it, maybe the splitting of the different portions of the press. Beginning, the core and the end are not the same quality. It's about the pumps you use, it's about the vessels you use, it's all about those little differences.
Yeah, for sure. And I can imagine that if you lack in something, that it will definitely highly impact the end product.
That's clearly my belief.
Burgundy and Bordeaux right now are quite big in France, and in the world they're the recognized region. Loire Valley, a wonderful region. I love Chenin Blanc. I could drink that every day. I would never drink Chardonnay. I would never drink Pinot above a Chenin Blanc. So, but we have to face that Loire is a little bit behind the Burgundy and Bordeaux. So, what would you say in the future? How does Loire put itself on the map?
I think,
what has to be done?
If I'm the Burgundy generation, you are clearly the Loire generation.
Okay.
So what is going to happen in the next few years is fascinating. But to understand it, you need to step back. You need to understand the history of the Loire Valley as a wine region. And think of it as linked to the kings of France. As you know, they've chosen the Loire Valley to build their castles. And if you go back as far as 1,000 years, 11th, 12th century, where we are in Anjou, for example, you have the most noble wines being produced. And these were white wines, so Chenin everywhere, on hillsides. Sometimes dry, but sometimes sweet, at a time where sugar was not available. Sugar became widely available at the end of the 19th century only, because it was industrially processed. But until then, the sweet products were the most magical products. So the reputation of Loire wines, really, if you go back 1,000 years, all the way to the phylloxera period, at the end of the 19th century, is one of top quality, age-worthy, top-level wines in France. Then comes phylloxera, which creates an opportunity to replant the vineyard. And in many French regions, the Loire is not different to others, but certainly in the Loire and in Anjou, where we are, viticulture moved to a productivist approach. It was the Industrial Revolution. People wanted to they chose to create different kinds of wine. Instead of focusing on those demanding white wines, they said, okay, let's produce everything. Red, roses, bubbles, sweet, white, every bit of everything. Very often and gradually over the 20th century, abandoning the great terroirs, so the hillsides that were very hard to farm, and moving to a more productivist approach. That was good until it became actually not so good for the region, because the image of the region started to change and it became synonymous. The Loire became synonymous for everyday wine, cheap wine, bar wines that you have by the glass in the bistros in Paris. And that really brought down the region until the 80s, 90s. And then a generation of pioneers. I call them the pioneers. You mentioned Joe Piton. In Anjou, I could mention Marc Angéli, Richard Leroy. There are many others. And in the Loire, there are even more. They were the first ones to believe in themselves, believe in their terroirs, their two great varieties. And they started to produce great Cabernets and Chenin, going back on demanding terroirs, moving organic, because of course, respecting the soil was the first step to producing fine wine, prolonging the aging, etc. So they were really the first ones to, I would say, believe in the potential of the region, and people like you and I knew it. But we were a microcosm. So for 20 years, it remained pretty much under the radar. It was a microcosm. The journalists, the critics, the sommeliers, people in the know were grabbing those wines because they were very cheap and they were exceptional wines. We, our generation, are going to leverage this work and push it further. And part of my objective, for example, by creating Belargus, and it took me many years to create the project, was to break the glass ceiling, because we need to show that the Loire is home to a wide range of wines. Certain very good, drinkable, fruity, everyday wines, for sure,
Yeah.
all the way to the most demanding age-worthy wines. And when you have a grape like Chenin and terroirs that have been identified for centuries, frankly, there's no limit almost to what you can, the quality you can produce. So there is a true revolution. The history is accelerating quite quickly. My project, at the beginning I was saying it's a 100-year project. My horizon is 100 years from now, where I am certain the Loire will be back in the top league. The Loire will be where it used to be, correcting this 20th century sort of mismanagement. But clearly it will not take 100 years. And I'm seeing this on a daily basis almost when I'm traveling, especially when I'm outside of France, I would say. In France, it may take a little bit longer because people have been used to this image of sort of cheap, everyday wines from the Loire Valley. Outside of France, because people know the potential of Chenin in particular, it's quite clear that the region is becoming it's an Eldorado almost, because today, let's face it, Burgundy in a way is helping us because their price positioning has become such that it's very hard now for anybody to drink the Grand Crus and the Premier Crus. When I was young, frankly, I could do it, a student could buy the Grand Crus. Today, I mean, even a banker sometimes cannot afford it.
Sure.
So that has created a huge opportunity for the Loire Valley because we are filling that gap and we are offering a price-quality ratio which is quite hard to beat, especially when you go to regions like Burgundy. So yes, I think your generation is the Loire generation. Today, it's incredible how diverse the Loire is and how qualitative it is becoming. There are so many winemakers. 20 years ago, frankly, it was the winemaker, I call it the winemaker paradigm. So people would say, Loire is pretty crap, but there are a few star winemakers. Today it's very different. There are so many good winemakers that you can't think of it this way. The whole Loire is interesting, from Muscadet all the way to Auvergne. Everything is interesting. You have so many good winemakers that you can choose. I like this one better, I like this terroirs better. And it changes everything because the region is moving away from a region that you can ignore. 20 years ago, you were a sommelier, you could ignore the Loire, nobody would notice. Or you would have a cheap wine from the Loire and it would be your entry level. Today, it's impossible to ignore. You just can't. And you can't limit it to just one Vouvray or one Saumur. You have to go to Anjou Noir, Savonnières, you have to go to Muscadet now. And that is fascinating. And we are many winemakers to pursue that dream. You, in the markets, are helping us realizing this vision. But clearly the next 10 years are going to be quite interesting.
For sure. And definitely when we were at the tasting, we had 6 wines, correct? 6 wines? And when we were tasting them, I was just like imagining exactly if this was a blind tasting and we had 6 Burgundies, 6 Loire Chenins, I would not be able to recognize what is what, because that quality that you displayed was exceptional. And I'm going to buy a few cases of these wines. So I would advise everybody to buy a few cases of wines because I think these wines, like you said, you have the vision. I also predict that these wines will become more expensive, more requested.
I mean, clearly we are at the beginning of a fundamental change in the market perception, and the demand is going to outgrow the offer very quickly. Very quickly. So now is the time to, like I did for Burgundy 20 or 30 years ago. Now is the time to look at the Loire wines. Again, there are so many to choose from that it's a journey in itself. If you have a chance to travel to the region, and it's true for anybody watching this, it's so easy to organize a trip in the Loire. Everybody will welcome you and they will open their cellars. Try to do that in other regions and it'll be harder.
Okay, so we're coming this summer. All right, excellent. Thank you so much. I think we covered a lot of topics. Definitely can talk to you for hours about this, but I wanted really to focus on a few exceptional topics that are concerning the Loire and your winemaking.
Excellent.
So thanks for being here. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow again at the tasting.
Yes.
Thanks for watching, everyone. And if you like the content, please follow, give us like, and send some feedback, whatever.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.